Okay, next up we have Julieann Buchanan from Wesfarmers sharing some insights on complex return to work claims. So very interesting perspective we'll hear from Julieann, currently employed as the Tasmanian manager for the Wesfarmers Group, Team Cover, representing around 3,500 employees, trained as an occupational therapist and ergonomist. I've spit that out. And career in public and private sector roles, practicing Canada and Australia in health and safety, workers' compensation insurance and occupational rehab. Professional interests include workforce ageing and participation, currently completing postgraduate studies at Melbourne Uni in ageing. When not studying, Julieann enjoys spending time with family renovating a little church recently acquired in Derby, Tasmania, into a mountain bike retreat. There we go. Or Derby, is it? Derby.
Hi everyone. The place I most like to practice is right home here in Tasmania, actually. So I must admit to being excited and a little challenged in speaking to you today. Excited because I love sharing, challenged because I don't know if I'll fit it into 20 minutes, and also challenged because the noise in here is really tricky. So if I'm not speaking loud enough, if you can't hear me, please tell me to pump up the volume. And of course, Cameron, who's down the back there, will jump up and get you exercising if I speak too much, I fear. So I will try hard to avoid that. So I do really approach this with the lens of someone who wears multi-hats, and in Tasmania I'm guessing most of us wear multi-hats in our organisations, not just one role. It is someone who is both the insurance company, I head up the insurance company, but it's not huge. I'm an occupational therapist, I am the case officer, the case manager, I pay the accounts, the direct consequences of any work-related injuries, and I do the injury management and look after that within our business. So it is really with that lens that I'm going to look at it, and I will look at it with you pretty much from if I was assisting or facilitating someone back to work. So in the spirit of words, in many ways this is an injury that is a consequence, a direct consequence of words. Words spoken, not spoken, things said over and over again, maybe not, and behaviours and actions that follow. So I want to start with a few words, and if any of you have worked within this space or experienced a bullying, harassment or psychological injury claim, I'm guessing you might recognise some of these. How did we miss the signs? Words repeated. Your side, my side, the truth. Report it to who? Emotions, apology, kindness, values, advocate, union leader. I'm so embarrassed. Angry, sad, tears, communication lines, and then they said return to work. I'm not comfortable at work. Do they care? Nobody called. Trust. They just don't understand. What now? Training? Frightened, lost time injury. Am I in trouble? I didn't see it coming. I don't understand. Should I call them? Primary, secondary flags, lies, support, help. I don't know if I can do this. Failure. I didn't realise. Investigator? Investigation? How many times do I have to tell my story? Reasonable administrative action? What? I don't understand. How many times do I have to tell my story? Do I have to? Does this mean they get away with it? Diagnosis, stress, anxiety, adjustment disorder, depression. It was pre-existing. No, it wasn't. I've never felt like this. Grit, Facebook, texting me, conciliation, communication. Case officer? Who? Legal? Do I need a lawyer? No, not yet, Rod. I'm just going to get a clearance. Management plan. What plan? This is unacceptable. All I did was raise my voice. I was frustrated, and then this happens. A certificate on my desk. I'm a good manager. I get results. It's the union calling. What? We need to learn from this now. So for anyone who has managed a workers' compensation claim or been involved in injury management in this area, it tends to present in a couple of ways. One is in the space of 3 hours and 5 phone calls and all of those words, or sometimes just quietly slipped under the door via an email or quietly mentioned. And if you're the person who's responsible, then a critical thing for you is to really tease out how do you step forward? Because at the beginning, you've got an upset, unhappy, possibly injured team member, stakeholders abundant, everyone's got an opinion, and you, what to do. And that's a bit about what we want to talk about with you today from an injury management perspective. So the things that I would like to cover in the time I have available, a bit about prevention and early intervention, which the guys have already talked about, but in particular, why do we miss the signs? Injury, disease, the Act, and workers' comp claims, because you can have a valid workplace injury, but not necessarily a compensable claim. And as a claims person, as a return to work person, as a business, you need to navigate through that with an injured worker who's never been down this path before. And critically finish with what I'm really here to talk about, which is around injury management principles, and offer up a framework that might certainly assist me when I'm managing work-related injuries of a complex nature, whether they're psychological, physical, or otherwise. So what I'd like to do now, if you're brave, is share something with you, and if in return you're comfortable, perhaps you'll share with me by raising your hand, and with those in the room, the other 50 people. I admit to being hurt by words. Raise your hand if in the last 6 months or so, someone has said something that has upset you, left you feeling uncomfortable, left you with unpleasant feelings. There's a few of us, thank you for being brave, and lucky for the rest of you for having such amazing people around you. But for some of us, those sensitivities can be stronger than others. It doesn't make us better or worse, but repeated over and over, that uncomfortable feeling can become so much more. It can potentially lead on to a work-related injury. And what we really want to do is be in a position in our businesses where we pick up on those signs. So when I was preparing for this presentation, I talked to a site manager who'd been through this experience, and you can read easily as I can, but up the top were some words of wisdom that I thought were particularly beneficial and I wanted to share with you today. And what he said is that no two situations are alike. Everyone's different, and it can be really hard to judge. And we miss the little signs. And we hear this a lot with mental health. We miss the little signs. But we have to be able to recognise and act with urgency upon those signs. And I think that is a lot about what our robust systems need to be able to do. They need to be equally sensitive to physical hazards as they are to psychosocial hazards. So if I have a sore back in the workplace and I talk to you about it, and I'm tearful or anxious or forgetful or showing some of those other signs, then I want our system to be equally responding to that. And we really need to train our people in the recognition of those psychological hazards, because I can't tell you how many times I'll see someone do an incident report for a physical hazard but would never think twice or even consider starting to look at how they were going to manage or recognise a psychological hazard. It's a big shift, a paradigm shift that we need to take in the same way perhaps that we have in the past with the physical hazards in our workplace. And there are myths, and you're all familiar with them. I don't want to intervene too early. I don't want to create a problem that doesn't exist. It's a furphy, I feel. There may be others. I don't want to pry. It's none of my business. These are all the excuses that we hear for not intervening early, but they're all the reasons that we need to train our people in having a conversation culture. It's all about just having a chat. And do we need to have all the answers? Of course we don't. There are so many places we can go to seek assistance and support. So if someone's sitting in front of us and we're going, oh my goodness, what now? Step back, it's okay, I'll get back to you. That's all our managers really need to know, is to acknowledge, recognise and find a way forward. So there is really quite a difference, I guess, between hurt and harm. Words do hurt, we recognise that, but do they harm? And of course, words repeated over and over, potentially, or even just a one-off, may lead to a work-related injury. And it's not, as we've recognised, just about what we say, it's what's not said that can quite often hurt just as much. Exclusions, inclusions and behaviours. Under the Workers' Rehabilitation and Compensation Act, how many people have had any sort of familiarity with definitions in this area? How many people would understand in the room, say, the difference between an injury and a disease under the Act? I know you do, Karen, I know you do, Patrick, I know you do, Andrew, but everyone else, how many people have sat down and had a look at what an injury might mean and what that might mean for a psychological injury in the Workers' Comp Act? Could I just have people say, yay, I feel pretty comfortable? Yeah, so Section 3 of the Workers' Rehabilitation and Compensation Act actually separates injury into two things. Injury, and for the sake of time I have here today, injury, I might say, is blood on the floor, on the factory floor, it's a traumatic event, versus disease, which is considered a defect, an ailment, a disorder. Something that might have happened suddenly or over time. And that's the area where psychological injuries fall. And disease under the Workers' Rehabilitation and Compensation Act actually requires us to have a higher test of have an injury versus a disease. There's a different test, and that test is it has to be the major and most significant contributing factor that caused my mental health issue, my mental health injury in the workplace. And we go on even further because there are additional exclusions. So under Section 25(1) capital A, if your injury, which is a disease, arose out of reasonable administrative action in a reasonable manner, and there are a number of other criteria, then you may well have an injury that happened in the workplace, but it is not a compensable injury in the workers' compensation system in Tasmania. What is important for us is that we potentially understand this as professionals managing our way through it, but for the worker it's the first time and they feel like their story and everything about them is being put up for question. And so what we need is a transparent way to navigate them through this, because critically what we want them to be doing is focusing on restoration and getting better, not about all of this bad stuff that's happened in the past. So there are a number of ways that we can do that. Being transparent and explaining the process is critical, particularly from a claims and an injury management perspective. But there are other things that we need to do, and they also need to be explained, and Rod will talk about investigation as part of the path of determining these type of claims. But ultimately it may well need that they go through a medical examination. They may well need to provide information about the circumstances of how this all came about. And how we capture that is really critical, because if you've got a HR team, a safety team, a claims team, and a bunch of other people asking for this story over and over again, you pretty quickly get the picture. Someone is having to talk about a negative experience, not a great experience, and it takes them right back into the past. And what we all know about our brains is if we play the same sad story over and over again, it's not good. Not good for us, not good for our well-being. So what we want to do is get through that phase as quickly as we can by focusing on creating a forward path. And that's a key role for us with rehabilitating and assisting people in the return to work process. Well, it goes without saying, if we get this bit wrong, the communication piece wrong, that we can guarantee ourselves a bad outcome. It was probably bad communication that got us here, and it certainly won't be bad communication that gets us out of here. And what you're faced with when you're pulling this together is, of course, the abundant stakeholders. You need to quickly ascertain who do you need on team to assist our injured team member back to work. They're central to the process, but there are a bunch of other people. Now they're probably coming together for the first time, and Paul mentioned the average cost of a bullying and harassment claim at around $22,000. So we've got at least a minimum of a $22,000 project team coming together to work for the first time on a key task. And they pretty much do need some rules of engagement. And so it's really important when we're navigating through that path as the return to work people that we're really establishing very quickly roles and responsibilities. Everyone will take a different role and a different lead. The medical people are going to take their part, the psychologist will take their part, but the employer will certainly want to take a key role as well. And I think there are some important things to mention in that area. First of all, IR, workplace issues, cannot be solved by clinical or medical models. They really do need the employer stepping up and assisting to manage that situation. And what we often find in this area is if the doctor or the psychologist feels like that's not getting dealt with, then they start to advocate for the injured team member, and then we all end up in an argy-bargy that's going nowhere close to return to work. And we all know that's the best place if there's a safe option for that team member. So for the employer, I really encourage you to get engaged early. It's the key. One of the issues you'll experience, of course, and we all know that the line manager relationship with the worker is going to be a key indicator of a good outcome, but what if they're the person that's actually accused of doing the bullying and harassment? You've got to find a way to maintain that connection. And you can't rely on your insurer to solve those type of problems for you. You really do need to take a key driving role. Reputational risk is, of course, at stake, and you want good people to work with you. You want, when you ring up the psychologist or the doctor, that they're not thinking, oh no, here comes that employer, they don't care, they're not worried about their values, this is what's going to happen, it's all about the dollar. You want them to take the call knowing that you're solution orientated and you want the best outcome for everybody. In Tasmania, we also come across a few other struggles and things like getting providers, particularly in the northwest. Getting a psychologist quickly and timely onto a file can be a real issue. I guess with the telemedicine technology taking off, that may change into the future, but at the moment that is a potentially real issue for us. And I guess at the heart of it, we have to recognise that the worker themselves fundamentally has a right to make their own choices around treaters as well. We can't choose for them. So if there's one thing I would say, it's about working collaboratively and getting this all sorted out really quickly, building in issue resolution paths, avoiding surprises, have a conversation. It's not too hard to pick up the phone and explain, this is what's going to happen, and then send the email or the letter. And that way, people may not agree with the decisions that are being made, but they'll certainly understand the process that was applied. And that's really important in this space. And of course, confidentiality goes without saying, and transparency in itself, the what, the whys, the hows, the whens, all of that is critical in really being established up front. So you bring your team together on what's going to be a fairly substantial project, a team that may have never worked together before. You have to work through a fairly complex problem together, and you're all located in different locations. I'm not immune to just getting everyone on the phone, including the injured team member, on a conference call if need be. I prefer to do it face to face. If I can get everyone into the doctor's office, the psychologist's office, my office, to talk about what we're embarking on together, I will certainly do it. So one of the key tools that I use in injury management is actually the clinical framework for the delivery of health services. Can I just ask, how many of the people in this room, except for the ones I know, how many of the people in this room have seen this document before? Could I just ask for a raise of hands? Okay, so this is a really good practical tool. It was put together by WorkSafe Victoria and the Transport Accident Commission, and I actually think it outlines a really nice framework for technical professionals and non-professionals in this space. What it does is give you a really simple step-by-step process to work through, and for the insurers and the self-insurers, we're actually required to live by this Bible, because our injury management programs under GB 195, which is the Injury Management Program Guidelines here in Tasmania, are in fact one of the criteria that we're audited against. So we develop our systems against this. So what this really does is it's not brain science, but it kind of makes sense. And when I talk about it, you'll probably recognise, if you've been involved in this area, that it doesn't always exist when we're managing work-related injuries. First of all, that when we have an injured team member and we're putting together an injury management program for them, that it's really based on objective assessment. And that information can tell you where they're at functionally right now, medically right now, and what do they need to do to make their recovery. And that those results are reproducible, so that when you intervene and you spend your thousands, $241 an hour on psychologists 3 times a week, that in 3 months' time you can come back and say, and did we achieve our results? What were the objective measures? How did we go against them? It takes a biopsychosocial approach, which I'm sure most all of you are familiar with, but that is, we take a holistic approach when we're helping people back to work. We take into account the biological elements of a mental health condition, and it may well require a chemical rebalance in the way of medicine. We take into account the psychological and the social impacts of recovery, because without it, without a supportive workplace, without supportive colleagues, and if a worker's got a "I'm never going to get better and this is all over" ethos, it ain't going to work. So we have to take all of those things into account. One of the things that can often happen is that the injured team member themselves loses power, and that's when we really are about to face failure, because they not only have rights, they have responsibilities, and within those responsibilities are the requirements to take steps to assist in their own recovery at the rate and the pace they're at the time that they've been injured. And so what is critical in that recovery for that worker ultimately is that they have education, they understand their condition, and they understand their role in the process. The next component of it is about setting functional goals, and I guess as an occupational therapist, and I can see Patrick, I think you're down there too, us OTs really specialise, and I think anyone from a health background is really into making sure that people have functional goals. And by that I mean, it's no use to say I'm going to decrease in anxiety if all I do is decrease anxiety. If I decrease anxiety and I can then take my children to school 5 days a week, or I decrease anxiety and I can walk into my workplace and I can attend a staff function, then that's progress. So by functional goals, what we're really talking about is establishing with the worker what's important in their life, what's important at work to enable them to get back, and let's make sure that we structure all of our treatment around it. The final bit's really about the best evidence-based treatment. There's a lot of treatment out there, and I mean, one of the absolute best ones, I'm sure Cameron will agree, is being physically active when you have a mental health issue. But there's a number of treatments that aren't necessarily supported by evidence and medicine. And so it's about being able to work out which one of those are going to make a difference. Is a remedial masseuse this week going to help, or is a gym program going to help? And this guide is really a useful process in that. And what you want is for everyone who's putting together their plan, and there are plans plenty, plans abundant in this area. You might have an injury management plan, a return to work plan, a medical management plan, a psychologist treatment plan, an exercise plan. All of those plans have to be on the same message with the same functional goals. So I think I've pretty much covered that, but there's a couple of things I would like to say, and they just really reinforce what we've talked about this afternoon. Tool up. There are abundant tools out there. There's a couple perhaps not mentioned. We've obviously talked about the clinical framework. The other one is the MD guidelines that sit on the WorkSafe TAS website and give you really good insights into medical conditions in this space, the type of recovery and return to work regimes that you might like to look at. So I really encourage you to read up in this area. Also, I guess in terms of skilling up, you're here today, that's a great start. People out there love to share. I certainly love to share, so if anyone ever has any issues in this area, I'm sure I would be more than happy to take a phone call to assist people. Appreciating confidentiality is always a big issue, particularly in Tasmania. It's a small place, and even just talking a story without mentioning names can quickly lead to 1 + 1 is clearly 2. So we have to be careful, but definitely look at it. And the other thing that we perhaps haven't mentioned, but I started with when I kind of threw a bunch of words at you, is just what sort of impact this can actually have on you when you're managing someone through a distressing situation like this. And there are only 2 of us in my very small workplace, and we both have had very, very long-term partners, so we both know who we sleep with each night. But sometimes we come in and we'll say, who did you sleep with last night? In other words, who did you take home with you? What was worrying you because you look tired today? And so it's absolutely critical that when you're managing your way through this path, that you don't absorb like a sponge all of the stuff that's going to come with it. You have to remain objective, and the best way of doing that is to make sure you've got support yourself. So prevention, I won't go through in great detail because we've discussed it a bit, but we really are talking right down at the bottom of the hierarchy here. But all of the learnings, and this is the point I really want to make from this slide, can really feed right back up into your safety systems to make sure that we prevent these type of situations from happening again. Ultimately, if you are engaging in the return to work space, there are plenty of experts out there that can assist you. There are plenty of tools and techniques you can use to facilitate a timely, safe return to work. That might include pacing, timing, graduations. A large employer like mine, we can afford to swap work sites, but if it's a Coles Express in Smithton, there ain't a site in Cooee, then we really have to deal with the 3 people at that site in a similar way that you might if you come from a smaller workplace. The roadblocks. This is me driving through the mud walls. Does anyone drive through the mud walls around here? It's quite a nice drive these days, but what I really want to say is that there will be issues along the way. You've guaranteed there will be problems, that things won't go smoothly, and that you need to build into any plan of recovery or restoration, rehab and return to work contingencies. But the skill in this space is actually knowing when to rush in with the cavalry and sort out the problem, or just step back and let the problem resolve itself. And in particular, when we look at empowering the injured team member, at times we do have to step back and just give them the space to solve their own problems. And there's times when it's just so off track that it's never going to work, and that's a brave opportunity. You might have to call it. That's when you get everybody back into the same room you started in and you say it's not working, and that possibly includes the injured team member if it's safe and their doctor, psychologist agree it's a good idea, they need to be part of this. Let's rewrite this and get a happier ending. What do we need to do to fix our problems? There's no point in just keeping on going and going on a path when it's quite clear the outcome is never going to be delivered. I am a big fan of Brene Brown. I don't know if anyone is into TEDx's or TED Talks around here, but Brene is an absolute star of the TED circuit, and she talks a lot about perfection. Let me say it's overrated, but ultimately a quote of hers is really something that resonates with me, and it's about let go of being cool and always in control. And I think in this space we really have to let go of blame and shame to learn and to move forward. And what we really ask people, if we're going to grow and learn from these kind of things that are happening in our workplaces, is the ability to be vulnerable. And I don't think there's anything more powerful than a manager sharing where they might have dealt with something in a manner that was less than appropriate or really didn't get the results, and then talks about that and talks through that with their more junior colleagues. I know from my own experience, when someone shares their vulnerability, and shares a story, I definitely take that away as a learning. And so I guess if we can encourage a culture of learning and growing, not blame and shame, but about just letting go of some of that being cool and always in control and always perfect, then we can really, really feed back into a much better culture of conversation and better results for our business. So I'm not sure how I've gone for time, Cameron, but you're standing there looking like you'd like to burst into the exercise, so I'll say thank you at this point. And obviously, I think moving towards Rod's presentation. And so Rod, you better make your way forward.
Thanks, Julieann.
And I'll head off.